Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners, hosted by agency veteran and coach Steve Guberman. Agency Bytes is a podcast focused on delivering actionable agency information from agency experts in about 25 minutes. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs thrive. I'm Steve Guberman from Agency Outsight, where I coach agency owners to build the business of their dreams. Today, my guest is Paolo Vidali. He's the CEO and co-owner of Hidden Gears, a distributed e-commerce agency with offices in New York and Honolulu. With over 17 years of experience, Paolo specializes in Shopify Plus development, PPC management, SEO, and conversion optimization, bringing a wealth of expertise in digital strategy and omni-channel retail. I'm so grateful you're here today because I think we've got a really valuable topic we're going to dig into. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to be here.
So I put out kind of a call to arms for people in our community of people with experience overcoming mental health challenges, personal struggles, things that may have otherwise just kind of put an end to their entrepreneur career or the agency career. And you've been through some things and you said, hey,
Yeah.
I've got some stories to tell. And I wanted to be able to bring people into like a safe half an hour of some experienced struggles that people have been through and some hope and inspiration, because life as an entrepreneur is challenging. Life in America can be challenging, even though whatever, we're the richest country in the world and it's still challenging. But each individual carries their own burden and their own challenge and their own struggle. And, you know, even the people I know the most about, I only know a tiny little bit. And so we don't know what other people are going through. And I really appreciate it. I'm super grateful for you and your willingness to come and just kind of share your story and some of the things that you've been through as an agency owner and just as a human person, you know, living in the world that we live in. So thank you, first of all, for that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I realized that going through the process that I'm sure we'll talk about, it's really hard to feel, vulnerable, especially in kind of a business setting. We always want to put our best foot forward and be very professional. And really, as an agency owner, you've got to be sort of in charge and have a path and inspire people and make sure clients know that you're on top of things. And the more that you're facing sort of behind the scenes, the harder it is, I feel like, to talk about it in general. So
yeah,
I think it's really important.
So do you want to give kind of like a quick backstory on you and Hidden Gears and, you know,
Sure.
what you're up to and how you got here?
Yeah, so I'm basically a completely sort of self-taught technical agency, et cetera, professional. I started out working for a software company when I was 16. I applied for an internship that I didn't realize was a college internship. And as a high school student, somehow got it. They pick me up from school and drive me to the software company after school every day. And so I started out building servers and doing sysadmin stuff, basically in the run-up to the dot-com boom. So I'm 42, so this was like late 90s, really interesting time to be a young person kind of DIY figuring out tech. And then, went through a liberal arts education, learned a lot, but didn't end up sort of using that in my work and sort of weaved through a lot of different kind of types of businesses, landed with an agency, some other software companies, et cetera. And then, so I started Hidden Gears over 12 years ago as side work. I was working for a digital agency running PPC programs for a lot of different clients up to the sort of Fortune 500 scale. And they didn't do any e-commerce because they're probably a little bit afraid of it. It was intimidating. There's so much detail. If a project goes sideways, it's really sideways. And I had learned the ropes of Shopify basically in 2009 when it was a 1 or 2 year old company working for another firm and said, hey, I kind of know how to do this stuff. We don't do it. Do you mind if I do that on nights and weekends? And that ended up becoming, after a couple of years, sort of enough to say, actually, I might be able to do this. So I started the firm by myself with the intention to scale it. And I've been doing it full time for 10 years. I ended up sort of bringing on my now wife as a business partner, which a lot of people are intimidated by and don't recommend. But I say if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, don't try it. But and we ran the company together for about 9 years, and scaled it to about 6 full time and 3 contracts. So we're definitely intentionally small, a little bit more boutique-y. And in the early days, we did a little bit of everything: some WordPress, some Magento, some BigCommerce, some custom carts, consulted for larger agencies, et cetera. And now we're really just a Shopify shop and really gone down a specialization path, more so. But yeah, work with folks around the country, and have just been a fascinating process of really learning the back end of other people's businesses and helping people do fundraising, Series A, and doing exits and scaling to the tens of millions of dollars from starting out with just one store. And yeah, it's been a really interesting path. I'm definitely like stimulated by the everything being different all the time kind of world that we're in with the agency side, where it's might be the same type of problem, but it's always a different solution or a different use case or different business need. And so yeah, always troubleshooting, always figuring things out, and that is really what I enjoy about this type of work.
And is your wife still on board as a partner?
We call her now more of a silent partner. So she's doing art direction on sort of large scale builds, and helping me with sort of back of house, HR, financial planning, stuff like that, but is essentially no longer client facing. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the intentionality of keeping it small and knowing where the lane you want to swim in, and knowing, these are the services we want to provide, and let's just stick
Mm-hmm.
to that for the most part. But you also said, you want to scratch the itch of like everything being, trying new things every now and again. And,
Yeah.
just the world of things being different here and there. And that makes it tough to stay in that lane. Sometimes you get called to, this side and that side. And a
For
lot of
sure.
times, or at least my experience, if you're the web guy, the web gal, the web whatever, you're the techie. And so whether it's, can you show me how to use a fax machine, or,
Oh
whatever
yeah.
technology issue or question they have, they're calling you in as that tech person because they handle the website. They know all about our technology, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
it's
and
hard to stay in the
also
lane there.
because I started my career in IT, I actually did know how to, reboot the
Hmm.
VoIP systems and migrate the email, and
Yep.
I got pulled into that a little bit in the beginning, and really had to set some hard boundaries and pretend like I knew less than I did, because I was like, oh, actually, I know what's going. No, I don't. I don't know what's going on with your systems. I'm sorry.
So talk about, some of the things that you've, or, when you and I previously spoke, you brought
Yeah.
me into some of the challenges that you and your wife have faced as partners in life, but also partners in business. And I think that presents a whole other, set of complexities. I
Yeah.
love seeing a husband and wife team crushing it. I coach a number of agencies that are husband and wife team or partnership teams.
Hmm.
And I love the hell out of it. I just think when it works, like you said, it's absolutely beautiful. And when it doesn't work, good. Leave the partnership at home and
Yeah.
do the business separately. What are some of the things that you've faced that have been like major struggles in your life?
Yeah, for sure. So, part of why the company's been, I mean, a large part of why the company's been successful is because I've had a partner who I can just, like you're never going to trust anyone else, any other business partner more than you would your spouse. So,
Mm,
um, having someone who you just know always has your back, who always is there to help, who through thick or thin, we're going to figure it out. It's really an amazing connection. But we always used to joke about like, oh, we should still have good documentation. We still should delegate things, because what if one of us gets hit by a bus, or that kind of thing, or like we should have life insurance policies, because what if I couldn't do this and you had to carry on? It's both of our only incomes. When we made that leap, it was a big leap.
hmm
Um, yeah, basically, out of nowhere, a little more than 2 years ago, my wife, who's was 35 and perfectly good health, running half marathons, etc., learned that she had colorectal cancer, which is a very low symptom cancer. It's also one that historically has not been found in younger people, say under the age of 50. Um, it's typically associated with people who have very poor dietary or other health complications, and just was really out of the blue. And that sort of forced a bit of a, obviously a personal crisis to figure out where's this at? What do we have to do? What are our options? Where can we go? And everything that goes along with getting a really serious diagnosis. There was a lot of ambiguity in the beginning too, because even though technology in medicine has advanced, exponentially over even the last 20, 30 years, imaging technology is not that focused. So we had doctors saying, oh, we think it's this bad, and another doctor saying, no, 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 it's not that bad. We can do this surgery, or we can do this approach. And other people saying, well, from my read of this X-ray or this MRI or this CAT scan or this, whatever, we think it's actually this. And so we also had to deal with a sort of conflicting information, like who do we trust, even if you're getting a second opinion or a third opinion or whatever. And then also being in a geographically isolated place, it was flying to different places to get different opinions and so forth. And so, at a certain point, we decided the best care would be going to MD Anderson in Houston, which is an amazing facility, and I do highly recommend it. It is truly world class, and they had a very different approach to treating cancer. Our first meeting with an oncologist was like, my goal is to figure out how to not give you chemo. And I was like, whoa, like this is different. This is not how other people think. And it was a radical approach to like, what can we do to minimize, the damage to your body as we are trying to get rid of something that's damaging your body. And I think that was also really important to us, because a lot of long-term outcomes in this arena don't talk about the sort of side effects that you can have for the rest of your life from doing major surgery, from doing radiation, from doing chemo, all those things that really affect the body. And a lot of patients who have, these types of diseases are going to be older, and they say, well, I have 10 years left, or I have 20 years left, not I have more than half my life left. Sure. Like, can I actually deal with this? So there was a lot of heavy conversations going on, obviously. And then it's a question of like, well, now that we've built this business together, this life together, all this has to go on hold. Like, the only priority, in her life has to be getting treatment, figuring out how to do that, and going through that very intensive process. And then I have to take all of that responsibility and figure out what to do with it and how to do that. And, how do we communicate this to clients? How do we communicate this to employees? How do we even tell friends and family? The interesting thing I found is like actually telling someone that either your partner, or if it was yourself, you have cancer, is like a really intense thing, because you're kind of bringing them down. And even though in theory, like, they will be people who support you in the telling of that news, you actually sort of have to support them, because they're starting to get scared, and they're like, oh no, what's going to happen? And you're like, no, it's going to be okay. So you end up comforting people in the position where you actually need the comfort yourself, or as a caregiver or as a patient, as kind of a weird kind of inversion, at least for a little while. And so we were kind of strategizing, like, what is the emotional impact even for in her day of like having to do that labor of telling people. So for some clients, we kept it kind of vague, and we said, she's having some health issues, she has to step back for a while. Some people guessed. Some people we had this sort of depth of a relationship with over the years, we told, and they were truly, wonderful, sent us care packages and shared their stories. And that's also partly why I wanted to share our story today, is that, you don't know until you talk to people, like what people have been through. And there's clients or close friends and people who are like, oh yeah, that's exactly what my aunt had, or that's what my husband had, or that's, I know someone who's been through that, and I know what you're going, and you just start opening those conversations, and it's really human, and it's really feels very vulnerable at first, but then you're also going to get support from places that you had no idea that, some of the most empathetic people are like, oh, I didn't even know, we have a business relationship. Like, you don't have to be this nice to me or go out of your way to really check in about her health every time we had a call, a weekly standing call, and making sure everything was as good as it could be, and so forth. So um, I will say that through that sort of darkness and chaos, there definitely saw the good in people,
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was also this kind of feeling I had in the back of my brain where it's like, if anyone really gives me crap about this, like, they're done. Like,
You were
you
kind of
have this,
loaded and waiting for somebody to,
yeah, you
yeah.
have this thing is like, this is it. Like, nothing can stand in the way of this important thing, because it was, truly a life-threatening thing. And like, if anyone says like, why isn't my report ready yet, or blah blah blah, like, I did feel like, just the amount of
Yep.
cortisol, whatever, stress pumping through my body, that I was definitely on a more edgy position, in terms of like, I have to really be tempered, I have to really be measured, but also like, this is going to be a sort of ethical line in the sand depending on how people respond to it.
Yeah. So you get this diagnosis, you realize I need to now run the business solo, be fully supportive of my partner,
Yeah.
um, communicate to clients. Did you guys put a plan in place? Did you step back and let your team run things for a while? Like, tactically, what were your kind of next, steps for
Yeah.
unloading this?
So at the time, we actually only had one full-time employee, because we had a developer who had kind of left, um, right before that, and we were like, oh, we're going to rehire, et cetera. And then it sort of was all, upside down, right? So we ended up scaling up with, I think, 3 contractors, and then ultimately in the long term, we've hired, multiple people to sort of take over her roles. He was lead project manager, lead designer, et cetera. But yeah, at that time, it was a mix. We actually essentially, not, fired per se, but we let certain clients go that we had retainers with. We're like, there's only so many accounts we can service right now, and um, some of them were higher touch, some of them were kind of lower touch, and it was like, if there's something that's going to be really high touch and need a lot of tending and a lot of ongoing communication and stuff like that, like, I don't know that we can actually pull that off,
Mm-hmm.
even with scaling with some contracting and some other stuff. And so actually, I'm happy to report that now those folks that we essentially had to let go did find other people to work with for, a year or two, and actually now are working with us again. So it sort
Wow.
of
Okay. So they
it
came
worked
back and
out.
after
Yeah,
the
because it
dust has settled
wasn't
a little bit.
personal. It was just like, hey,
Yeah.
we just, to be honest, that's all we can do. And we've always tried to run the agency with a sense of transparency, and being like, hey, if there's something dev related where we find a way to do it, and it, saves you money, and we don't need the entire project budget, we'll give that back, right? Or we'll tell you when something is way more complicated than you think, and we need a lot more. We're going to tell you, we're going to just kind of call it as we see it. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had that sort of approach too, where it was like, this is what's going on, and this is our capacity, and this is what we can do. Or we need to reduce hours, which is, everyone's always trying to get more hours and higher
Yeah.
budgets, and they're like, can we phase this out? Maybe we can tackle this in 6 months. Or here's some referrals to other agencies that we're friends with and work with, and or freelancers and so forth. And took some amount of a hit financially from that, but in the end, we're able to at least keep things running, to what we felt was the degree of service that we wanted to provide, which is being a little higher touch, very communicative. But if it was like, hey, I can't make that call because I have to be in a doctor's appointment for her, like, that's just the breaks. I no longer felt guilt. I think I was sort of
Mm-hmm.
absolved of some of the guilt of like always feeling like I need to do everything all the time for everyone, which is good and bad. And just saying like, no, this is it. No, I can't. This is my availability this week. Like, take it or leave it. Sorry. And I think that did create a little bit more of emotional distance between my me in the business, where it's like, well, I have to delegate more, I have to step back more, I have to think about this in a different way. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I think that led to some more maturity on my part, and some more depth of like, okay, this is moving from being a doer to being a leader, which
Mm.
was always kind of a Venn diagram of we were doing some production work and doing this and that, and really making a starker contrast for that.
So fast forward 2 years since she was diagnosed.
Hmm.
What are, as a leader, what are some of the takeaways that you have from this experience, or things that you, I guess, did or do, regularly, just to kind of take care of yourself, communication styles, or things that you've integrated into your leadership profile as an
Yeah,
owner?
for sure. I mean, I've definitely learned how to put a good face on things and how to you know create a situation where we can still try to stay positive, try to inspire people, and then you know not be so emotionally transparent that they know everything that's going on or know our every worry. I think that's the other thing. I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit, and people know if I'm upset or know if I'm whatever, and being like, okay, this is part of that, and here's how I have to be and show up, and because I don't want everyone on the team stressed out about it. And in the end, her treatment was successful. Chance of remission at this point is extremely low. It's not an ongoing worry, which is really, really lucky in terms of catching things earlier and
Mm-hmm.
having really good care. Um, and the sort of silver lining, I think, is that it did really force us to delegate and hire multiple people to replace her essentially, and have me get out of dev because by trade I'm a marketing developer, and I was you know, doing a lot of code at that point, a lot of management of clients at that point, and saying, yeah, there's good people everywhere. We just got to find them, get them, and really make sure that we are not the ones who are necessarily doing the work. We'll still jump in if we need to, but that really did, I think, accelerate that change. And then the weird part about that, of course, is that then the business grew. So like we went from intentionally retracting the business by probably 20% to then sort of getting it back to where it was, or the trajectory we would have been on had we not intentionally kind of pulled back, to then, growing 30% because we actually got out of the weeds ourselves. Um, and so that's been interesting, like, oh, that's, the theory and practice. Like you listen to all the podcasts and you talk with all the consultants, and you're like, if you only did this, things would be different. And it actually ended up sort of happening in a roundabout way.
Yeah, and you were forced into what what me and other coaches are telling owners to do is, if you step back and if you focus on top level stuff, and if you stay in the vision spot and get out of the tactical spot, you'll be able to grow or stay in your lane or get rid of, super high
Yeah.
touch clients. All these things that you had to do in order to be a good caretaker
Hmm.
helped you, kind of drop down, right size the agency or level up, and then it gave you runway to grow it into, something bigger and hopefully healthier. I would imagine at this
Yeah,
point, healthy, and I use that term across the board, not just
sure.
fiscally, like all the other things, right?
For sure. Yeah, and that's actually honestly part of the what I would associate with the leadership piece now is because of her, kind of sudden diagnosis. I went to the doctor, I found out I had sort of catastrophically high cholesterol, and I was like, oh, I don't want a coronary when I'm 50, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that was the trajectory. And I also don't necessarily want to be on pharmaceuticals for the rest of my life. Like what can I do? And that caused me to really like, eat healthy, prioritize sleep, which often in entrepreneurship is the first thing that's thrown away, right? And then really like exercise. And I found it was like doing these hour-long runs or sessions at the gym or what have you. I was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm getting this mental clarity to see the big picture, and these ideas are popping in my head, or this project that was bugging me, I sort of, work it out by the end of the run and was like, oh, actually, maybe we could take that approach, or actually, maybe I should tell so and so, and I'm taking notes on my phone.
Yep.
I'll try not to fall off the treadmill. And that actually really had a sort of major impact on my mental health, as well as like, first of all, I have way too much stress to be keeping that in, and running that out, working that out, getting that out felt good on a sort of physiological level, but also that sort of cleared my mind to sort of do that sort of, okay, if I need to come to work and have this hyper focus and really not think about everything that's going on, I also, it's easy to get caught up in all the details and not have the time for that big picture stuff, because as soon as I step away, like it's back to crisis mode, reaction mode, all of that. So
Yeah, I love that. That's a major takeaway for you. That focusing on body, mind, spirit, all these things that are important to you, and balancing it back out gave you greater clarity so that you can be almost more laser focused on solutions.
for sure.
Again, that's your job. But let's say your developer starts doing these things, the clarity that they would get, or anybody can benefit from focus, learning to focus. And I have a very personal meditative practice that I've had for many years now, and a lot of people think, oh, how do you turn your brain off for meditation? I'm like, that's not the point of it. The point
Yeah.
is to gain clarity and focus, which is running is meditative, and for the for a lot of people, the gym is their meditation. And you don't need to just sit full lotus on a cushion. There's a lot of different ways to learn to quiet and focus the mind. And I mean, the way you explain it is exactly the kind of takeaways from that kind of a practice and habit. So I love
Yeah.
that. What about
Yeah.
like the reframing for you and your partner as far as priorities of life, and before we hit the record button, you're like, I've got to revisit a
Yeah,
5-year goal and vision, and how has this experience impacted your perspectives?
for sure. Well, say after, treatment was successful and there was, a good amount of healing and the body heals slowly, that we definitely went into a bit of what we started calling the YOLO phase, which is just like, hey, you want to take a trip? You ever want to see that thing? Was there that, band playing that you always really liked? And it's in Seattle, but, we're just going to do it. We're just going to
Hmm.
absolutely do it because, life is too short. I think that's calming it down a little bit now, but that was definitely part of it. I mean, refactoring priorities was absolutely part of it. As young small business owners who are self-taught, you know, running an agency in what I now call the sort of D2C boom of 2018, 2019. I mean, we know what it's like to work a 100-hour week, an 80-hour week,
Hmm.
a 60-hour week. And at a certain point, we realize, so it's like, is that actually worth it? Delegation or not, like even if the team was doing it, or whatever, we had to hire 10 people to do it, like is that really what we want out of this?
Yep.
And I think that there's a lot of stigma about lifestyle businesses. I used to get this going to pretty like developer conferences a lot, where I would say, oh, you have a service business, like not a SaaS business, or you have, you know you don't have a product business, that's not a real business. Oh, you have a lifestyle business. And there's a lot of condescension
Yep.
in certain circles about like what's a real business. um, I think Danny Meyer said business is a problem, and that was a big unlock for me. It was like, oh, in order to add value, we have to solve other people's problems, and faster and sort of better than they could if they were assembling their own team, right? But what are the problems we want to solve, and like to what extent do we want to do that? And yeah, there's people I knew who started agencies, and they're like, year one, I want to make $1 million revenue. I'm like, oh, okay, like there's people who come out and they have a vision to do something, and that's great. But like our vision was always to like do good work for good people. And what scale that is, like the business could retract and I would be okay with it at this point, and saying like, you know what, if it means I work 35 instead of 65 hours a week, or 50, whatever it is, like that can be okay. And that doesn't mean that we're a failure, or we're not on track, or not good enough, or whatever. I think that along with just doing anything, but certainly in entrepreneurship, certainly in tech, certainly in the amount of people who are self-taught in tech, there's a distinct imposter syndrome that people have, and I think
Yeah.
it takes years, if not a decade, to get over it. Where now I look back and I'm like, wow, we did a lot of stuff for a lot of people. It's kind of impressive, but like even in my head now, I'm going, oh, you know, are are we doing the best job we can? Are we is there more stuff to learn? Like, could I have done this? And I think it's easy to be self-critical. And then when you have that sort of peanut gallery of people that are saying like, oh, it's not a, you have a lifestyle business, that's not a real business. But majority of businesses in this country, small businesses, are super small and they're family based or have
Mm-hmm.
family ties, and that's life. That's the life people want. So that was definitely another thing, is saying like, where do we want this to go? Um, I think in some ways it definitely um, made us grateful also that we were self-employed, even though it is scary to have something major like this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, in the state that we live in, like technically speaking, if you work for a company with less than 50 employees, you could be fired
Yep.
for having a major illness, like for having cancer. Now, ethically speaking, is that happening? I don't know, but like it's on the table. Or they could say, if we worked for, if she worked for an employer of less than 50 people here, they could have said, well, you can take unpaid leave, to move to Houston for 3 months to do treatment, but we're not going to pay,
Yep.
and just realizing like system can be pretty bad if you don't have an empathetic or progressive employer, or if the rules are such in the place that you are that like actually benefits could be cut off for the other person, etc. So in that sense, we had more freedom, and we had insurance that would pay for out-of-state treatment. But on the same token, there's a lot that's not covered. Okay, so you think about max deductibles and this and that and the other. I mean, there was tens of thousands of dollars of things that we had to pay for out of pocket at the end of the day.
Yep.
And to not go into medical debt, you sort of have to work for yourself or be a highly paid information worker for someone else. Like, it's crazy. The system is not set up for major care without major repercussions financially. And so I was like, oh, I got to build some more websites. I got to do some more stuff. And I could have that lever to pull to be like, this year, everything is kind of going towards healthcare, but we can make that happen without being crushed by it. But for a lot of people, it would be a super bad situation. And so, um, that's just one of those things where we're sort of fortunate that in that sense we had that flexibility, we had the ability to set our schedule, we had that ability to really try to hustle and pay some bills and that kind of thing.
Interesting perspective. Both like, I love the YOLO phase of life, like, because you don't know when it's gone. So shit,
Yeah,
live it up. You may as well. But also, like, because we are at the helm and we get to kind of dictate the direction this thing goes, versus I have a job and my salary is capped. Like, you
yeah,
can open up the floodgates of how much ever revenue you want, versus my salary is what it is and we're just going to pay down this debt for the rest of our lives, kind of nonsense.
yeah,
So super interesting. So she's doing great. In remission,
yeah,
regular checks, I'm sure, scans, etc.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, they have a lot of really interesting technology now. There's like nano DNA tests for like micro cancers. So there's all kinds of stuff in terms of once you get into the more monitoring cycle of making sure that even if something might start to crop up, that you know about it right away. Um, have had really good care, and yeah, there are long-term side effects. No one really talks about the stresses of the body, and you're taking surgery, you're taking pieces of the body away. Of course, there's going to be repercussion. I feel like there's
Yeah.
a general consensus that with cancer, if you're lucky enough and you get cured, that's it, and then you just go home and like do like the rest of your life is normal, but it really isn't. Tig Notaro, the comedian who sort of initially went viral for her comedy set, a stand-up set about cancer, has talked about that also recently, about like, she's like, yeah, I'm on 5 different medications for the rest of my life and I'm experiencing this and this and this, and like people think it's like, oh, you're cured, that's amazing, that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And yeah, and has that affected how much she's involved in the business to a certain degree? Yeah, and also what she wants to do in refactoring, obviously her sort of goals and priorities in terms of career and everything else. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot that happens after, and I think that's sort of where the medical system ends. Is like, medical system is really good at figuring out, oh, you have a crisis, we're gonna we're gonna go in, we're gonna fix it, and then it's boom, gone. It's not, at least in our experience or in our research, a lot of like survivor support groups for young people who are like sort of in the same phase of life. Also, I had to really learn about caregiving and something you and I chatted about a little bit before is like really being a caregiver is so underappreciated, and
Mm-hmm.
I felt a good amount of guilt from it even after I went through it, because I've certainly had friends and family who've gone through their cancer journeys or major medical journeys, and I never really knew what to do to like try to support them other than like be generally sympathetic and kind of check in. And I think it's something you sort of learn by doing or learn by being really close. Someone's going through a process and being like, yeah, the amount of sleepless nights, the amount of stress, the amount of just fight or flight, panic modes, things that have to happen. It's really um, understated, like what goes into that as in terms of caregiving. And so I'm much more aware of that, much more, you know.
I even think it's draining to just summon up consistent compassion, right? Maybe
Mhm.
Monday you're like, I'm all in. I'll bring you soup. I'll Tuesday, okay.
Yeah,
Wednesday, it's like Jesus. I get, you know what I mean? Like it can weigh on you, and
yeah,
so you've got to summon that regularly to be like patience and compassion and
right.
all of that. And
There was certainly, yeah,
yeah,
some things about like, hey, could you just please, like do some of the dishes? Some like after, like 6 months of like, yeah, I'm gonna cook, I'm gonna clean, I'm gonna, do the yard, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna drive, I'm gonna, at a certain point you're like, hey, we were partners, right? Like, can you have the energy to do this, and have those conversations too,
hmm
because yeah, sometimes that gets hard, even though it's like, well, I should just have this infinite well of like
yeah,
ability and compassion. It's, we're human, we're all human, we all get burnt out, at
yeah.
some point.
So, all right, and you mentioned burnout, and kind of my last question is,
Mhm.
what have you incorporated into life to manage, from hitting burnout, both personally and professionally, and
Mhm.
some of the practices that you guys have together?
Yeah, so I would say now that we've been trying to travel a lot more, because it's just such a phase shift. Um, I always say, as a small business owner or small digital agency owner, you're always kind of working. Like, right, there's no pure vacation days that I really take on, even if it's an hour in the morning or 3 hours or something. It's a little, but even just like getting out of your normal routine, your normal place, just seeing different cultures, seeing different places, having the sunshine differently, having
Mm-hmm.
the food taste different, just having that context really is, at least for us, has been a big reset. And in terms of burnout, really having hard and fast rules about overtime. Like I said, we have clocked each over 100 hours a week at certain points. I don't really think I'm proud of that. I think it's really, really bad to do
Mm-hmm.
on any kind of regular basis. And so it's like, well, you know what? I've done everything I can do, and I just have to wake up and start fresh tomorrow and whatever. Like, um, I think that there's this idea that we can plow through anything, but really without rest, without eating well, that was also a big thing. We used to, it's like, oh, this is like the pizza week, because we're just like every day we're working too much, right? And it catches up to you. So
Yep.
really prioritizing health, being like, no, even if I have to still deploy this thing and it's buggy and I haven't figured it out, I have to stop and make dinner for like an hour. And it feels like pulling teeth in the beginning, but at the end of it, it just really makes a huge difference. So that type of thing again. And we've been also very careful not to lay that kind of responsibility or that sort of expectation with employees or contractors or clients, or just like, we don't want other people doing it, even if we're going to make up the gap and try to do something to hustle. Like, we don't have a hustle culture where it's like, why aren't you doing this at 7 p.m.? We're really trying to provide work-life balance for other people, even if we were sort of hypocritical about it in the early years,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to make sure that, again, like, we have a happy, healthy team as well, and yeah, man, making those hard decisions. I think it's, for us, it comes down to, it's not always worth doing it for the money, right? Like, there's other things in life
Yeah.
too, and we're gonna say like, yeah, maybe we will be a little smaller, a little less profitable, a little less whatever at scale than maybe we wanted to be, but like at the end of the day, health is wealth, like the cliche. Like there really is, in when you just take it for granted unless you lose it for a period of time, and then you realize, oh man, like maybe the once a year you have the flu and you're like, oh, I forgot what it was like to have the flu. Like this is so terrible. Like it's being in those moments that gives you that context to appreciate it and try to structure, something that's healthy and for the future too.
Yeah, well, I'm super grateful that she's pulled through and has kind of seen the other side of where you guys are now and the perspective shifts that you guys have for yourselves, for your team, for your clients, and the culture that you're, kind of pushing into your agency of it's not a hustle culture. We're not going to encourage anybody to work 100 hours a week. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
And the practices that you've implemented into your lives and again, into the culture of your agency, I think it's beautiful. I think all too often we as humans just kind of might need a jarring experience like yours or potentially worse in other cases in order to make the changes needed, to be seen. So I'm glad that you've found those changes and have been able to implement them. And again, super grateful for you to share your journey and your, what you guys have been through with the listeners. So thank you very much.
Of course.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks again for tuning in to Agency Bytes. If you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love to hear about, go to agencyoutsight.com/podcast-guest and nominate them.